Good morning, everyone. We are starting a little later than planned, but we're going to make sure it's a rich and exciting discussion. We'll make up for some lost time. And again, thank you from both ICCT and RAP for joining us here today. I'm Shravya Reddy. I'm here on behalf of RAP, the Regulatory Assistance Project, which is an international nonprofit that works on policy and regulatory advisory to decision makers in the power sector globally. RAP has existed for over 30 years with experience in Europe, North America, China, and in most recent years, India as well. I'm here though, both as a senior advisor to RAP on climate change and low carbon development, but also as a partner to ICCT because of a study that ICCT and RAP did together on the implications of smart charging of freight fleets. So it's a very exciting study at the cross-section of freight fleet electrification and our power systems and what an increase in freight electrification will mean for our power grid. The study is at an advanced stage. It's taken almost 2 years. It's involved a lot of modeling. And it's been a true partnership between ICCT and RAP, as well as our technical partners, MPN Systems, who've carried the India piece of the work. I will just briefly introduce the project because it kind of provides the background. It's the catalyst for why we're having this discussion here today. The study is actually a cross-regional study. We're doing it in 4 different regions: Europe, the US, China, and India. And in each of these geographies, the case study is slightly different. It's tailored to local priorities, local context, local needs. And of course, the scale of study is different in each case. But the focus is on freight electrification and the impacts on the power system, especially on the distribution grid. In China, we've looked at it at a provincial level. In Europe, we're looking at it for France. And in the US, we've looked at it at the state level for Colorado. And in India, with our partners, MPN Systems, we've looked at it at the Delhi city level in terms of truck depot charging, but more broadly at the Delhi-Jaipur corridor in terms of the highway situation. The methodology broadly has followed the same approach in all four regions. We've started by quantifying electric vehicle stocks, present day and future projections based on expected demand and other factors. And ICCT has taken the lead on that, given that that's their area of expertise. We've then looked at quantifying the infrastructure needs for that type of EV freight growth. What does that really mean in terms of power demand? What does that mean in terms of the load at each charging station over the course of the day? Factors like that. Then we've also looked at where it makes sense to project the location of these charging stations that will meet this increased demand. We did that based on looking at traffic flow data and driving patterns, local electric grid capacity, and other factors that influence site selection. With all of these factors together, we were able to model, and again, using a range of assumptions underpinning the study, we were able to model what this means for business as usual charging of this electric vehicle growth in demand versus smart charging or managed charging. So charging that's done in a deliberate and conscious way to have benefits to the grid and possibly to consumers. And we looked at a few different scenarios of what that smart charging could mean, what it could be influenced by, such as electricity rates. And finally, where there were benefits to the grid or there were impacts to the grid, we were also able to estimate some benefits. What does that mean in terms of costs? What does that mean in terms of solar penetration, renewable energy for smart charging, and the implications of that for greenhouse gas emissions, for instance? So again, the study is different in each of the 4 regions. Some benefits have been modeled and studied in certain regions and not others. For instance, the avoided costs of expanded grid build-out. That is not something that we've yet had a chance to do a deep dive in India, but we hope that this study will actually tee up future studies where we will have a chance to look at factors like that. We are going to get to the policy implications, but before that, I'd actually want to invite 2 of my colleagues, one after the other, to actually share more of these findings of this study with you. Before I call them, though, I would like to invite a distinguished expert panel onto the dais today. I will introduce each of our panelists and invite them to join us here, because we will be asking them to share their insights and expertise over the course of this session. First, when the presenters have presented their findings from the study, we will turn to the panel for some of their initial reflections on what they've heard. And then after a Q&A session that is also open to the audience, we'll transition into a structured panel discussion where I'll have the chance to pick the panelists' brains on some key issues related to smart charging, freight electrification, and the implications for the grid and the environment. So I'll just invite them one by one with a brief introduction. We're very glad to have Mr. Drew Kodjak, who is the co-founder and executive director of ICCT. He is an environmental attorney who has worked at the US Environmental Protection Agency and the Biden-Harris White House. He has multiple decades of expertise in vehicle emissions regulation, and under his leadership, ICCT has influenced clean transport and clean transportation policy in major markets, including the EU, US, China, Brazil, and India. Thank you, Drew. Next, I will invite Mr. Vijay Jaiswal. Mr. Jaiswal is the director of the Smart Freight Center India. He has over 20 years experience in public policy, international development, climate action, with a focus on clean mobility and sustainable transportation. And his career has spanned both the private sector and the public sector at the central and state levels. Thank you, Mr. Jaiswal. I will now invite Professor Zakir Hussain to join us too. Professor Dr. Hussain is an electrical engineer who has been working on issues of renewable energy and electric mobility for over 13 years in India and in Europe. He's currently an associate professor with the Department of Energy Science and Engineering at IIT Bombay. Thank you, sir. I will now invite Mr. Abhijeet Sinha to join us as well. Mr. Sinha is a senior technocrat and policy entrepreneur who is currently the National Program Director at the Ease of Doing Business. He is also project director of one of the Government of India's flagship projects, the National Highways for Electric Vehicles, where he completed India's largest 210-kilometer e-highway technical trial run. Thank you. And I'd also like to invite Mr. Anand Singh from the India Smart Grid Forum. Mr. Singh is in the India Smart Grid Forum's general manager and head for technology and smart grids and electric mobility. He was the chief architect of the Smart Grid project in Gujarat and has played key roles for over 20 years in several major initiatives related to grid integrated vehicles, smart grids, freight corridors for electric trucks, and renewable energy. Thank you so much, Mr. Singh. So as you can see, we have a very distinguished panel and a lot to learn from them today. But we are going to start off with the presentations of my colleagues from ICCT and MPN Systems. So I will exit my slides and I will call Aviral Yadav, who is a researcher at ICCT focused on greening transport, particularly low emissions strategic development. Aviral, thank you.
Thanks, Shravya. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, all the cool ladies and gentlemen. I say cool because despite rain, you are here, you understand the importance of this topic, and limiting the warming. So that's why. All right. So I'll be giving you an overview of the charging infrastructure needs of heavy-duty vehicles. A more deep dive and technical details can be presented by my colleague further. Talking about emissions, yesterday we had a very wonderful session on e-trucks, and what we understood is that the future is electric, and electrification of truck is the only way that we can meet the net zero target for India. And one of our study, it projected that the rate of penetration of these battery electric trucks should be around 17% by 2030, and then 43% by 2035, and so on. So the key idea is that we need rapid deployment of electric trucks. And if we try to translate these percentages into absolute number of vehicles on road, so by 2030, there would be around 1 lakh, nearly 1 lakh electric trucks on road, and by 2035, nearly somewhere around 4 lakhs. So are we ready to support these electric trucks on road in terms of charging? And why are we talking about charging? So there are two perspectives to that. Firstly, the current BET ranges, the battery size and the distance the truck can run, they are around 250 in the range of 200 and 250 kilometers, and which is okay if your truck is doing a back to the base operation or a intercity kind of operation. But for the FMCG and lot many other sectors, what we found out that the range required is, or the daily running is around 700, 800, 900 kilometers. So even if we design a truck with a battery with a range of 250 or 300, it will not be able to run the truck for a full day. So that's why we are talking about charging. And the other perspective is that the more battery you will have, the more expensive will your truck become, and also the more battery you will have, the more payload you will lose. So that's why the kind of there is a kind of optimization that is required, and that's why charging will play a important role in making these trucks a reality on ground. So what are the different options we have? So a lot of people talk about overhead catenary charging, where it's just like the railways. You have a catenary which takes the current from a fixed and continuous power line that is running above. So this is being there was a trial in the Europe also, I think near Berlin, about 7 kilometers of the catenary charging they tried. But now, if I am correct, they are rolling it back because it was not feasible and it's very expensive. The other option is battery swapping, and I would say China has been the champion in this one, because they had a plan released in October 2021, where a 2-year pilot program, where they were trying to electrify about 4 of their corridors, making them battery swappable ready. So it was a 2-year program. We are still waiting on the final numbers, how it performed. But one interesting thing is, there is something called CVCP, so Commercial Vehicle Carbon Neutrality platform in China. That's a group of 25 research institutes, and what they found is that battery swapping will not be able to exceed 5% of the penetration rate in terms of charging technologies. Mostly it will be point-based fixed chargers. The third is again the stationary chargers, and that involves some overnight ones, which is 100 kilowatt DC charging, some fast charging 350 kilowatt, and ultra fast, which is the megawatt level charging. These chargers can be either deployed as a public or private, like in depots or in the destination where let's say any industrial or a factory facility. So now there was a study by ICCT, and we tried to find like how many chargers are required in the ZEVTech member countries. So India, not surprisingly, we are good in numbers. So we will be second largest country in terms of charger demand, and we will need about 5 lakh public chargers for truck by 2030, and this is second after US. Most will be definitely depot-based overnight chargers, 100 kilowatt, but then we also need fast chargers and ultra-fast chargers. So why is there a need for e-highways? So firstly, when we talk about heavy-duty vehicle charging, it's different from the passenger vehicle. How is it different? The vehicle itself is huge. You need lot of maneuvering space. The battery power levels as well as the amount of energy required is huge, so that increases the safety risk as well as the impact on the local grid at the time of when the vehicle is plugged in. Again, the cost factor is huge. We are looking at somewhere around 24,500 rupees per kilowatt, and the chargers we are talking about is in the range of 250, 350, 500 kilowatts. So the cost is huge. So that's why we have to optimize and strategize where we are putting these charging stations. The other thing is time to operation. So we had someone from California electricity, I don't know, department or something. So they were having a knowledge exchange session with us, and then they shared the details that if someone comes to a utility in California and they ask for setting up of a heavy duty vehicle charging station, then what is the timeline that utility gives in terms of how much time it will take. So if it is if a new feeder is needed, it will take 2 to 4 years, and if the substation needs to be upgraded, 4 to 8 years, and if totally a new substation is required, 8 to 12 years. That is the kind of waiting time. So if we see where we are now and we are aiming for 2030, I think it makes sense to prioritize this and think about like what are the strategies. Other thing is, in the graph below you can see how India's infrastructure in terms of electrical infrastructure, the substations have increased. They have doubled over last 10 years, and that because we are a growing country, it will keep on happening. So there is an opportunity to align that development with the what is required for charging infrastructure. Charging infrastructure is again needed for scaling up the transition. We cannot just have a target without the infrastructure, and everything comes down to utilization. So utilization of trucks, but also as well as the charging infrastructure. So unless these charging points are strategically placed, they will have less utilization, and then that breaks down the whole thing. Now let's look at around the world. I will present 2 examples of how these countries are dealing with this problem on where the charging station should come up, how to go about that, what are the regulations. One important one is Europe's alternative fuel infrastructure regulation. So it was released in 2023. What it talks about is it's a binding regulation. So all the members in the EU, they have to have certain share of heavy duty vehicle chargers on the TENT network. So TENT is Trans-European Transport Network, and it has 40,000 kilometers in the core network across these countries, and about 2 lakh kilometers in the non-core. So the crux is that by 2030 they require about 350 kilowatt at the urban nodes, 350 kilowatt around the TENT network, and 150 kilowatt at the urban nodes. Urban nodes are where the 2 networks are merging. So it's a kind of a binding target. The next one is the USA's strategy. This was prepared, the National Zero Emission Free Corridor Strategy. It was prepared by the Joint Office of US Energy and Transport Department of Energy, and EPA and DOT. So this is a strategy and it's non-binding. What I found interesting is when we think about where the charging stations for heavy duty vehicles should come up, we think of fleet volume, which is good. We think of the grid, which is good. But here they are also focusing on the environment and air quality burden, like which communities are actually getting a lot of these negatives of diesel vehicles. So they are prioritizing those. So maybe that's an important learning we can take forward. And interestingly, Drew was at the White House in his sabbatical when this policy was released. So maybe he will be giving us more details on that. Now, let's come back to India. What is happening here? So I came across this document. It was released in 1st of July 2024 for inviting public comments. So this is a India EV charging infrastructure guidelines document. It's just guidelines, nothing is mandatory, but it's a good guideline. It says that we need at least 2 EVSE of 250 kilowatt capacity, and like whatever heavy duty vehicle charging station will come up, it should have 2 for 250 kilowatt capacity. So overall we are talking about 500 kilowatt of capacity at minimum. In terms of the distribution, it says the fast charging station should be at every 100 kilometers and on each side of the highways, expressways, and the public and near the public charging stations for other vehicles. The third arrangement is land is an issue. So what the guideline says that the government or the public entities, they can be provided the land at on a revenue sharing basis. So yeah, these are good guidelines and a good starting point, I would say, and maybe we'll have more discussion on what can be improved. Now we come back to what Shravya started on the Delhi-Jaipur highway. So Delhi-Jaipur is a very important industrial corridor. We have lot of different kind of industry, auto parts, machinery, white goods, construction aggregates, and it's about more or less 300 kilometers of distance. Now what we did in our analysis is we collected the vehicle traffic data at all the toll booths that are there. So we have Delhi, then after Delhi we have Khirki and Shahjahanpur and Daulatpura. So we collected all this data and we translated this data into vehicle like electric trucks, like how many electric trucks will be running, and we applied the VKT growth, and there was a lot of modeling which went, and what we were able to find, let's move to the results, is, so on the right you can see the distribution of the public chargers. So there is also a component of private chargers which is there in the report, but here I am only focusing on the public chargers because we are talking about e-highways. So the one interesting finding is, if we go by the guidelines, they say the fast charging station should be at every 100 kilometers, but here we are seeing even on the Delhi Khirki section, which is just 50 kilometers, we would need about 150 fast chargers only on 50 kilometers of range. So and so on, like the distance, let's say take any example, Daulatpura Jaipur, again 35 kilometers, just 35 kilometers, but we would need overall 50 chargers as a combination of fast and overnight. So the takeaway is that the guidelines are good, but we need to do a lot more, and we can give it as a feedback. So the results of this analysis and some of our learnings are that 100% e-truck sales by 2045 for India would translate into 73% of the vehicular traffic on this highway to be turned electric in terms of trucks. And to cater to this large trucking fleet, about 204 megawatt of the installed capacity of chargers are needed by 2030. And Yeah, then few takeaways are that the data is very hard to get. It was a very long and intensive, time intensive activity. We had to do manual surveys. Then there will be heavy impact on the local grid, and I think MPN systems will be talking more about that. Then there are also grid limitations, so particularly in remote areas along highways. So is there a substation there? Is there a network connection there? So the way forward is that the electric trucks can only come when there is enough charging infrastructure, so that is crucial. But some questions I would leave you with. So what are the short and long term policy interventions that are required? There are some land type and electricity connection issues. There is a lack of data on vehicular movement. Can we create a data sharing platform so that it is anonymized, but we have, because this is all a collaborative effort. We cannot build it in silos. Data on grid is very important. Can we have it, can we make it open access? Government does already have that data. Can we make it open access with some layer of protection if they are concerned? And yeah, collaborative efforts are needed between government, energy companies, logistics firms to build these charging networks. So thank you, and I look forward to this engaging discussion. I hand over back to Shrav.
Thank you so much, Aviral. We are going to open it up to questions, but we'll open it up for both Prajakta and Aviral after we have our second presenter as well. So that will actually lead me to invite Prajakta over. Prajakta, we'd love to have Prajakta present the findings from MPN systems portion of the study. What we've heard from Aviral, some big takeaways is there's a spike in demand growth for electric vehicle charging. It's such a significant growth that it will need a ramp up of electric vehicle charging infrastructure to meet that demand. And of course, that has implications for the grid, for utilities. How can utilities meet this demand, and can they do so in ways that are smart or beneficial in certain ways? And that's the component that I think the second presentation will touch on, or is motivated by those questions. So I'd like to invite Prajakta to share findings on that. Prajakta is a senior manager at MPN Systems Advisory. She is an environmental architect and leads research projects on electric mobility, air quality, rural development, and spatial planning. Thanks, Prajakta.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks, Shravya, for the brief introduction. I also have my colleague who's joined here, Shravya Anand, and thank you ICCT and RAP for inviting us, here to talk about the project, which is a larger part of the global study that is ongoing project that is here. My presentation here today is going to talk about smart charging in the Indian context, and specifically to understand the traffic pattern and the impact that it has on the grid. The flow of my presentation is going to be introducing smart charging, and I know Shravya has briefly spoken about on what smart charging is. The details of the project and the scope on how was this entirely planned, the methodology that was undertaken. The Delhi-Jaipur corridor very specifically on details of the site study that we undertook, because the traffic component is a very huge part and a very important part of this entire analysis that we undertook. And the post-site study, which is the modeling approach and the findings that we have. So smart charging, quickly just to talk about, is basically intelligent charging, the way we look at it, of electric vehicles, which adapts to conditions of electricity grid and the need of EV users. I would not spend more time on that because, of course, Shravya has spoken about that. But very specifically coming to the project details and the approach that was taken, adapted by jointly together by ICCT RAP and MPN Systems being its technical partner. So the idea was to develop a comprehensive plan to see on how deployment of EV charging infrastructure along the freight corridors can address the challenges that are posed by high capacity charging. So that included shortlisting suitable corridors, collecting grid availability data, identifying prospective EV charging sites where this actual charging can eventually happen in future, evaluating the time of day and time of use tariffs, assessing the potential grid impact of EV charging, and then coming down to recommendations of feasible tariff signals and smart charging strategies. Moving ahead to the part 1 of the study, which is the site study itself. So we started with the Delhi-Jaipur corridor, and there will be a minor overlaps with mine and Aviral's presentation here. So we started with the Delhi-Jaipur corridor. This is a part of the NH48 of Delhi-Chennai as a larger national highway. The total distance that the highway covers is 2807 kilometers, so 2800 kilometers approximately. And the origin is at Kherki toll naka. So the one that you see, is my pointer visible? No. Okay. So the starting point is at Gurugram, where you have Kherki toll plaza, and the end is at Daulatpura toll plaza, which falls in Jaipur. The total travel time that generally a user would take is 5 hours 45 minutes, and there are 15 major cities and towns that are in between this entire corridor, and 5 important industrial model townships. So at Manesar, Patwandi, Bawal, and Bhaira industrial estates. So that makes very much interesting on why this corridor is very much important and is required for the study to be taken. Several reasons also to support on why this corridor is important. One, the traffic volume itself. So this entire corridor experiences high traffic volume in terms of the freight movement, and of course that is supported by the presence of logistic hubs and the IMTs that are there on this entire corridor. Delhi and Jaipur both are significant logistic hubs, and hence this corridor plays a key role in terms of supporting the supply chain activities and of course the IMTs that are around in this region. Third very important reason I think is the government initiative itself. A lot of push that is there from the government to actively promote electric mobility, and of course government has set ambitious targets for the adoption of electric vehicles. The corridor itself also acts as a major economic artery. So there's a lot of movements of goods and services that happens between this entire corridor. And of course this project can be a technological showcase is what we thought, and hence the Delhi-Jaipur corridor is why we've used. While we say that there is a huge traffic volume that is there on this entire corridor, there is hardly any data that was available for us to undertake any of the analysis further. So it became very important for us to undertake a detailed survey, a manual survey that Aviral also mentioned in his presentation. So we had to hire enumerators on the ground to take manual survey and then conduct traffic counts and interviews and develop questionnaires at certain spots, which are the toll nakas, and also to interview the truck drivers itself to understand the behavior patterns, because that is something that plays a very important role when you're talking about charging and the intervals, the stoppages, the halt points that we are going to eventually see further. So the methodology that we employed here was to the data points to be collected, a questionnaire, a detailed questionnaire that was created by us, and the field visits were divided into 4 sections. Very primarily was the site data itself, so to collect site data in terms of where would be these appropriate locations where EV sighting can really happen. The traffic count, so the manual counting of number of vehicles at 3 selected toll nakas or toll plazas were done across the Delhi-Jaipur highway and the vice versa. So to and fro is what we conducted the surveys for. Conducted interviews specifically with truck drivers to understand the driving pattern and their behaviors. And we also had a chance to interview and visit substations which are there along the highway itself. So along the entire highway is what we looked into. This was a very detailed week-long study and time-intensive, as Aviral also mentioned. So we decided to capture data which was on 2 of the weekdays and 2 of the weekends. So that gives you an understanding of what is the traffic flow, because that really affects the traffic in terms of the weekends and weekdays. The data that we were collecting was basically to understand what is the hourly truck count volume, so which was disaggregated by the vehicle body type itself, which is rigid trucks or are they tractors, trailers that we're looking at. What is the gross weight vehicle that we are capturing for? So we looked into categories like 7 tons to 12 tons, 12 to 16 tons, 16 to 25, and then 25 tons and above. Also then we started looking at what is the fuel type. So do we really can cite any of the electric trucks which are there on the road as of now. The vehicle halts, the stoppage locations, the stoppage times that these are encountered. So what is the particular time for which the truck drivers do halt. and what is the daily distance driven by these trucks. So can we then help, understand the charging demand, and it would lead and give inputs to ICCT's model also. So that was the entire aim of doing this entire study. So moving ahead, basically the idea was to map the potential EVCI sites, so the charging infrastructure sites. So to start with, we created a buffer of 500 meters on both sides of the highways to understand on where these sightings could eventually happen, and also 2-kilometer buffer for the warehouses to be plotted. We then mapped approximately 50-55 sites to start with, which included dhabas, petrol pumps, open parking lots. So general areas where the truck drivers generally, park for their daily requirements. We identified warehouses where we conducted also additional interviews to understand their behaviors and patterns that could emerge out of it, and then the substations and all of those. So here you can see that on one of the maps, all of these locations exactly have been marked, which is parking locations, dhabas and all of that. Plus on the other side of the map, the second map basically talks about the nearest substation. So we visited few of the substations which cater to industrial loads and manufacturing loads which are along these highways, the corridor. So the section 1 of the questionnaire basically focused on understanding a lot of data with respect to the site, so site mapping. So the geographical location, site area type, the available area that is there, the area designated for the charging station, truck parking capacity, because these all factors eventually lead to understanding on how exactly or where exactly this infrastructure can be eventually planned. So the willingness to invest, and surprisingly a lot of dhaba owners that we spoke to were all very interested to, they understand, and there's enough awareness that is already built to understand on how charging infrastructure will eventually become important. We also started looking at data capturing to understanding the parking profiles. So which was basically to understand how many types of vehicles are parked on a particular location and their classification, because that eventually leads to the charging demand calculation that ICCT would have eventually done. To understand the share of freight vehicles and the average time and duration of these parking. The accessibility was an important parameter, and the charging stations itself. So are there any existing charging stations in terms of catering to needs for 2-wheelers, 4-wheelers, 3-wheelers, and is there a transformer location nearby? So understanding the grid availability becomes very much important when we're talking about this entire project. So extensive data capturing data capture is what we looked into. The another survey that we undertook was specifically to capture kind of data points from the truck drivers, which was to understand their patterns and behavior, as I mentioned. So almost 100 plus interviews across the entire corridor were conducted to understand the relation between the type of vehicle and the site itself. So, what are their stoppages, what are their halt points is what we wanted to understand. Coming to few of the survey findings, which are both qualitative and quantitative in nature. So very interesting driving patterns emerged out of the entire survey that we looked into. One is where the drivers are engaged by logistic firms, where they usually transport goods between two specific locations. So the industrial hubs around Haryana is what they're catering to. So they're engaged between two kind of goods between two specific locations. The second one is the drivers that are employed by the transport companies, who don't have a very fixed starting or an end point, because their needs are basically decided on the amount of or the type of delivery that has to happen. Also what happens is the Delhi-Jaipur is a sub-route for the larger delivery routes, that is goods going to Gujarat, Karnataka, Maharashtra and all of those. Also what we understood from the truck drivers interviews are there are no specific halting locations of choice. So they generally these truck drivers stop at affordable eateries, which are generally dhabas. So random dhabas, or where they have their own comfort and relations built across kind of years, is where they stop. Near toll plazas, because that's where they do their tire checks and all of that. And then the petrol pumps, where there is ample parking space which is available. That is what generally we also see, right, across petrol pumps where these trucks are parked. The stoppages generally last between 30 minutes to approximately an hour. So this was a very interesting key insight that also goes as an input to the ICCT model to understand what is the time that is available for charging eventually for electrified freight vehicles that we're looking at. And also the two halts between the general halts that the truck drivers take is between 60 to 100 kilometers is what we understood. So these were the key findings that we got through our surveys. Through the substation interviews that we did and we conducted, we understood that most of the substations currently on this route have a very sufficient capacity for new connections. So anywhere where there is overloading or underloading as an issue, the transformers installation and removal is generally what the substations look into. And as of now, they haven't led with any of the grid congestion or stability concerns that the DISCOMs have faced yet. Also, because this corridor is very much on the industrial kind of belt and the industrial loads are very high, that is generally peaks from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., which very much coincides with the manufacturing operation loads. Understanding and coming up with a very generic strategy for substation overloading becomes very difficult, because that would depend very much on the type of consumers that are connected over here. And similarly, the HDVs or the heavy duty vehicles that we are doing this entire study for, it's very much challenging to estimate the stoppage and resting time, hence very much kind of challenging to understand the charging demand. So these were some key insights that went into the model itself for ICCT and also the modeling exercise that MPN Systems took ahead. Now coming to what were our findings and how did we map these traffic data that was plotted over here. So what on the graph that you see here basically is the traffic count, that the data that is being collected over 2 days, which shows very distinct patterns observed during the weekdays and weekends. So A, B, C, D that you see here are basically slots, which is A, B for your weekday and C and D on your weekend basically. So the drop that you see in the traffic count, this entire data has been captured at the Kherki-Daula toll plaza, which is there. So the drop that you see basically here, that's happening from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. at the toll naka, because that's basically which is the ban time for the freight vehicles to come inside Delhi, right? So your slot A that you see here is 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. and slot B is 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. That is your ban time. So that is where you can see the drop that is happening. So that also indicates that the vehicle movement at the toll plazas indicate that the vehicles are parked somewhere. So either it's inside the city, they've passed the toll nakas and they've entered the city and they've parked somewhere, or it is outside, the cities, because they are just entering the ban times. So this was a very key, I think, insights that we got from the traffic count that we captured overall. And then you can see high traffic volume in the other slots that are so. The high movement of traffic that is happening generally during the other times which is there. Now all of this data was then kind of fed into the modeling approach that ICCT took and also MPN Systems took, and the collaboration that happened. So quickly coming to my last of my slides, the methodology that we deployed here was first to build on the traffic profile based on the gross vehicle weight classification and the hourly traffic count. This all data was fed into ICCT's model to understand what is the charging demand estimation. So Aviral spoke about the charging demand and the type of chargers that they came up, which is fast and ultra fast chargers. So it entirely fed into their model, and then inputs from ICCT's model was again taken back to the modeling approach that MPN Systems developed. So it was to understand the charging profiles that could be created, the parking profile, the incentives and cost assumptions that go into the model, so to understand what is the average cost to serve and average cost to charge over here. Then to see how this entire the shifting of charging demand to solar hours can be created. So we would, in my next 2 slides, I would talk about the creation of these scenarios and 2 cases that we could build out of it, and the calculation of APU, which is the average profit to utility that we see here. So coming to the first case that we see here, basically, as I mentioned, there were 2 cases that were created, which was basically to understand the total charging demand for 2023, 25, 27 and 2030, and a business as usual scenario which was there. Under each case we created 3 scenarios, scenario 1, 2 and 3, and of course the model gets a bit complex here, and we would be open to questions later to understand on how these scenarios were also built, on what was the threshold that was calculated, the charging demand that was calculated in non-solar hours, and how did we shift to those. So in case 1 here, interestingly, what you can see is that we are assuming depot charging to happen, which is presumed to occur extensively during the nighttime hours. So the slot that we are looking here is from 10 p.m. to morning 6 a.m. and which is an 8-hour total kind of a continuous slot that we are looking at. So the charging demand from fast and ultra fast charging is added here to get the total charging demand which is there. Now what happens here is the average profit to utility, basically what is generally is calculated by covering the cost, the typically calculated by revenue minus the expenses, is all in all the scenarios is better than the business as usual scenario that is being considered here. So this gives us a kind of a good understanding on how really the APU, comes out in a very positive picture. In the next slide that we have, basically the case 2 that you see here, the depot charging occurs during the periods of low traffic flow. So we saw there were 2 slots that were identified, which was 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. So that is where we are kind of considering the depot charging to happen. That is completely determined by the traffic surveys. So what happens here is basically in the case 2, you see the scenario 3 can result in a negative change in APU, which is compared to the business as usual scenario. So shifting all of the demand to the solar hours might not be the feasible from the utilities perspective. That is what we also discussed with a few of the DISCOMs that we interviewed in Delhi and in Jaipur, that the complete shift to solar hours might be the right case to do. Coming to the recommendations and the final slide of the study and the analysis that we took basically. So the model showed a lot of mixed outcomes, which highlighted the potential and the complexities that are involved in aligning the charging demand with solar generation. So there have to be alternatives that will have to be looked into. There have to be incentives eventually if you have to bring, behavioral change with truck drivers and the movement patterns. So we were able to draw insights on key factors for successful freight vehicle charging implementation, which of course emphasize on influencing the truck driver behaviors and the movement patterns. Now in the case of off-peak period and the solar generation period where it coincides, incentivizing the consumers to shift their electricity usage to off-peak solar hours would allow the DISCOMs to reduce the strain on the electricity grid during the peak hours and maximize the use of solar energy. So there has to be strategies that have to look together, and of course, as Aviral mentioned, it has to be like collaborative effort between governments, energy companies, logistic companies that could lead to all of this. So overall, basically the integration of renewable energy sources with DISCOMs can address the driver behavior and is crucial for sustainable freight transportation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prajakta. That was a lot of information, but it also means that so much work went into this study from both ICCT's and MPN system side, and there's a lot to take away from that. We will allow questions to the speakers on some of the more technical aspects of the study, the methodology, the findings. But before we do that, I want to sort of take us one level up and just think about some of the policy implications of what this is all pointing to. And I will also very, very briefly ask our panelists for their initial reactions, responses to what they've heard from this study. What does this mean? What should we do about it? From our point of view, the results, and just kind of capturing what both Aviral and Prajakta have said, smart charging is a win-win strategy. It's a win for consumers because with solar tariffs, with the solar rebate, it provides concessional tariffs for the consumers, the fleets, to charge, and therefore they save money on lower costs of charging. For the utilities, the average profit of the utility, the APU, in most of the scenarios, the APU was better. The utilities profit was better with solar charging and the smart charging during solar hours than it was in the business as usual scenario. And of course, this is a win for the environment because solar charging means working off of renewable energy, potentially means this demand will be met with greater generation of solar power to feed into the grid and clean our energy mix a little bit. More of the findings, I've just kind of captured that all, but yes, incentivize charging during solar hours through preferential tariffs can reduce pressure on the grid during evening peaks. And again, this isn't something that came directly out of the study, but when you look at the load profiles and you look at where a great deal of the charging happens now, and some of it overlaps with the evening peak, the fact that you can shift more and more of it into the earlier solar hours definitely has implications for peak load. The average profit of the utility is better under all scenarios of smart charging compared to the business as usual scenario. And yes, optimized charging during solar hours has the greenhouse gas abatement benefits that I've just mentioned. What does this also mean? I mean, just breaking it down into even more basic takeaways. Smart charging of electric trucks will save system costs. And the more highways we do this on, the more money will be saved. Smart charging of electric trucks reduces emissions. And again, the more we do it on more of our national highways, the more there'll be an emissions benefit. Smart charging, though, needs a collaborative strategy, because this is where the transport sector and the power sector need to work together to meet this growing demand from freight electrification. But that electrification and meeting that demand needs to be done in a way that benefits the utility, that doesn't place undue stresses on the grid. And then smart charging needs cost-reflective tariffs, such as this incentivized solar charging, to shift that behavior, to get more of the fleets to charge during the day, during the solar hours. So what does this really mean when we leave this room? Well, we should be setting more cost-reflective tariffs, but providing solar rebates to incentivize solar charging. And the good news is the government of India is already doing that. There's been a recent draft guidelines and standards on electric vehicle charging infrastructure just this past June. And those guidelines actually do provide for a rebate, a concessional tariff of a 10 to 20% reduction at charging stations if it's done during solar hours. Now, of course, these are draft regulations. We need to make sure that they're adopted and implemented. And it really comes down at the end of the day to planning. We must plan for coherent EV charging infrastructure based on charging needs and grid characteristics. But if it's done cohesively, if it's done hand in hand with both sectors working together, then smart charging and smart planning will definitely yield a win-win scenario for everybody. So that's sort of the high-level takeaway. I know that we started a little bit late, so I'm going to ask our panelists to be brief in their initial remarks. We are going to open into a more detailed panel discussion, but from everything you've heard from Avril and Prajakta, any initial thoughts about what this might mean? And maybe we could just start on this side with Professor Zakir and move that way. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. It was very insightful presentations, both speakers that made on this particular study, highlighting some of the key challenges that are around these e-truck charge infrastructure requirements and the challenges. So it does highlight local challenges that we have specific to Indian context, but at the same time what we need to understand is that the diversity of the India that we have in terms of these highways as well will demand many more such surveys and studies to understand the different local specific challenges related to charging infrastructure on these highways. Because I know some of the highways where trucks are stopped over the night before they are allowed to actually ply on those highways. So therefore, the scenario changes over there. So they do have a lot of availability during the night hours for charging. So therefore, that it does change from one corridor to another corridor. That local factors need to be considered. And what I would, in the interest of the time, would conclude with this particular comment is that availability of the grid for additional load because of this megawatt scale load that we have is very important. The grid infrastructure that we have broadly in India is not having enough margin to actually cater to these additional demand that's coming at megawatt level. We know that our distribution systems have not been designed to cater to these charging load, which was not thought of when they were designed. And then when this additional megawatt load comes to the DISCOMs, the upgradation becomes one of the major challenges because the cost implications it have and the status of the financial status of the DISCOMs that we have across the country. So therefore, there is a pressing need to think of alternatives, how we can better utilize or rather best utilize the existing infrastructure to cater these charging demands of the electric trucks that are going to come in Indian context. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you for 2 excellent presentations. Really a tour de force from both of you, so thank you for that. Really setting the stage in an incredible way. I'll give a couple comments, but with the starting caveat that despite the fact that you just tried to educate me a great deal in what's going on in India, I fear that my perspective is from the U.S. and I may make incorrect assumptions there. So, but it seems like there's a lot of overlap. I've got, I think, 7 points here. I'll run through them relatively quickly. The first is the size of the chargers, so overall. In the U.S., and maybe this doesn't apply to India, it depends on the size of the tractor-trailer trucks and the needs and the weight and all of that, right? But what I saw on your slide is that the top level of charger was 350 kilowatt hour. In my conversations while at the White House with the major truck makers, so Daimler, Volvo, Triton, Triton in particular, their vision is 1 megawatt chargers, right? Along major corridors. If they know they have that, they can then design their trucks with smaller batteries that then have less impact on weight and load and freight carrying capacity and cost. This is a big deal. And so, but it's also a big deal to the grid, right? And the capacity that you need and all of that. So I wanted to point that out, and I noticed that the European AFIR regulation also didn't require 1 megawatt chargers. It just requires 350, and that seems to me to be a big disconnect between what's necessary for trucks. So just to point that out in stark relief. Second point you nicely put on your slide, Avril, and this is, I think, based on what you heard from California, so I wonder how much it relates to India. We should know that, right? But everything that I heard from the manufacturers, again, at the White House in the run-up to the release of the heavy-duty truck rule was that it's not money so much, it's time that really terrifies them. Of all the things that worry them, them being the OEMs, they're making billions and billions of dollars to invest in the EV transition, new battery plants, et cetera. And yet the whole transition hangs on whether or not the utility planning process can be shrunk down, right? If it can't be, then their timeline doesn't work. And the regulations that are now in place in the United States will have a hard time coming to pass. So what is the equivalent? Is that timeline that you provided for California and the U.S., is that equivalent in India? I assume it is, but I don't know. So that would be a good thing to better understand. But that is the issue for us, and I think for you as well. Let me talk about money. And I raise 2 points there. One, in our experience in talking with stakeholders in a large number of companies, oh, you asked me to be brief, by the way. All right, I'll stop shortly. money doesn't seem to be the issue. There are a lot of companies, at least in the United States, I think in Europe, that are willing to put money out, billions of dollars out, to make the investments in the charging infrastructure per se. And that's good, right? And they'll do the analysis and figure out where they... one proposal on how to speed up the regulatory process from the utility side is just to have payments coming in so that you don't have to then go to the ratepayers and say we're going to rate base all these charges. In other words, if the private sector or the public sector pays for the upgrades to substations and transmission lines, et cetera, the process gets shortened because you don't have to go through all the hoops to figure out whether or not you can rate base the money. An interesting proposal. You have to raise the money, of course, but that may work. At least in the United States, the whole structure around utilities is to slow down and limit the amount of investments that are made, et cetera. And now we need the utility sector to flip and build ahead of demand, right? Are we going to be able to transform 100 years of regulations in a day? I don't think so. So we need a real and planning is... So I will stop. I'll stop there. But really fascinating studies. Really sets the table for a nice discussion. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so a great study by all means, and I've been referring to ICCT studies for, getting insights on this topic for a long time. I would say a lot of good findings there which we can build upon to enable the ZET transition in India, but I would also say that we have to look at the entire charging requirement for these trucks, both from a destination as well as opportunity charging perspective. In my understanding, the highway charging infrastructure is largely going to serve the opportunity charging requirement and not the destination charging requirement. The destination charging requirement largely fulfilled by the ICTs, the warehouses, the plants, and the yards and the depots. So if we are able to do a mapping of what kind of requirement for charging for these trucks is going to get fulfilled by these locations, and then whatever is required in that sense from the highway charging perspective, more to complement that infrastructure will be helpful. Now we should also say that at Smart Freight Center we are working on scoping for these ZET pilots with a large number of companies in India, and we have been able to develop a taxonomy of what kind of deployments would happen in short term. There are 3 areas where we see these deployments happening, and that in a phased manner. So we call them closed loop, regional movements, and the long distance corridors. The closed loop is where we expect a short movement, point to point, predictable route, so on and so forth, where we see the charging requirement for these ZETs would be largely fulfilled by captive charging stations by the shippers who would be deploying these trucks. Some sharing of infrastructure may be, but that's not the thumb rule. And this is where we see the first uptake of electric trucks in India that would happen, followed by the regional movement of trucks and followed by the long distance movement of trucks. So with that kind of understanding and mapping that what kind of a captive charging infrastructure would come up in the next few years to service the first uptake or the first trucks being deployed, and then look at the complementary, or rather say the highway charging infrastructure as a complementary infrastructure to suffice the need of opportunity charging. That will help us map the requirements on the highways better, the required investments better, the grid capacity better, and so on and so forth. The other thing that we also need to consider is that at any point of time when we do a demand projection for electric trucks, we should also realize that these number of trucks are going to ply on the highways 24/7, So maybe 2,400 trucks passing through a point in 24 hours. So basically we are saying 100 trucks passing through a point at any given point of time. And this is what brings us to the concept of scheduling, that we should be able to schedule that, or maybe at least guesstimate the schedule that these trucks would follow in terms of approaching and accessing these charging stations, and thus accordingly plan these so that 50 charging stations on a stretch of 300 to me looks like a bit too much, and that might also be not very, very attractive or, reasonable from investment point of view. That's all.
Thank you, Aviral and Projekta, for nice presentations. You talked about, Aviral, your projection regarding a number of electric trucks coming to the roads is around 1 lakh till 2030. Right. So I got a little scared. I'm not questioning your numbers, but but I'm thinking that how we're going to meet up the demand. I mean, if we think of having 10,000 charging stations, 1 megawatt each, so we need 10 gigawatt for only the charging at roadside, and this can be more. So I'm hopeful that we reach there. But when you discuss about the timelines in US, then I'm kind of okay. We are much agile that way in India, so that's not the problem in here in India, and we get really fast electricity connection if we compare what happens in India, what happens in US. In terms of smart charging, smartness is possible at both ends. It's like when the grid is available or electricity is available and you are getting it, merely depending upon solar hours would not be very wise, because you are running and you are running 24/7. So I foresee storage play a big role here, roadsides. And if you look from the utility side, way back in 2005 and then afterward we segregated our agriculture feeders, where you have to give electricity for 10 hours, and then we segregated them, and then there are rural feeders, urban feeders, where we have to give electricity 24 hours. Now I am saying that we will have to segregate highway feeders also, because I have seen electric buses being charged from running gensets. I mean, you are running gensets, then you are running the charger, and then you have defeated the entire purpose actually. So there is a need from, I mean, a lot of push has to be given to utility, and I think they're more agile and they must be thinking that how we are going to solve this problem, because this is a regulated market. You cannot say no to anyone. If I come to any DESCOM and then say that this much capacity I want, they'll ask for the service fee and then they'll give. That way they are fine. So at charging level also smartness is possible. I have seen the innovation that is happening at charger level and charging stations, that earlier I would see that a 240 kilowatt charger having 2 guns, 120 kilowatt each, and then you can charge 2 buses on the depots. Similar can be done with the trucks also. But now the innovation has led to 360 kilowatt charger, and then you have 6 dispensing units. So you can charge 6 trucks. So suppose the kind of infrastructure you are going to save, and then it's just the smart play between, and the trucks and buses are stopping there for top up. It's not that they are stopping there and then they will do the whole full-fledged charging. So that is also, smartness will play their role in there. And in terms of solar energy, while I was doing a project, still doing a project in Gujarat for National Solar Registry. So the new problem what I have seen from utility side is, during high peak solar hours, once you generate more, the voltage level goes up in the grid, and then your inverter trips, charger inverter trips. So during peak solar hours, when you are generating maximum, you are not feeding back to the grid just because of it, they are having high voltage. So that is the solution for the truck charging. That during peak hours when you have maximum load, you can arrange such feeders so that this can be consumed on the highway by the trucks. So that is also one smart way we can think of. And rest, I think I'll hand over to my colleague and then.
First of all, very warm compliments to ICCT team for doing Delhi-Jaipur. We were doing pilot, I think, 2 years back on Delhi-Jaipur, so we did not have trucks. And Amit, being working member of National Highway EV, we always wanted that the truck pilot, when it is happening, it should be at least 3 degrees above than the bus pilots. Today, after I think 1.5 years, I am seeing the presentation, what Prajakta, Shravya and Avril has done, is actually very structured. It is also covering all those aspects which we could not cover in the bus component. And definitely the numbers of bus are less on roads than trucks. So when you are putting up efforts, your efforts is much multifold than our efforts for bringing buses on those highways. It also required to keep majority of information which we did not needed in the bus segment when we introducing bus freight on that. Second thing is, which I want to speak and share with the audience, also our esteemed panelist, is as a nation we are on a position we have to take this call that what type of e-highway we are going to make. There are 2-3 types of e-highways globally. There might be more variation to it, unknown to us, but the famous one is Germany, definitely, which to an extent in the presentation we have seen, where they have as of now only conducted 3 technical trials. First was 10 kilometer in 2020. It was between Frankfurt Airport, Lübeck interchange to the Rainfield Junction. It's only 10 kilometer trial. The overhead wires and the other things which we have kept. It's a 56 kilometer, it's A5 Federal Autobahn. Second trial which they conducted was 12 kilometer, and it was between Zeppelin Cargo City to Frankfurt Darmstadt. This costed 90 crore rupees, and the first one costed 132 crore rupees. The trial run cost was additionally first you have to put infrastructure, and then you have to put vehicle have to have extended arms. That's one school of thought globally. To an extent it is not fully rejected, but if you try to replicate it in India, which happened, our Minister of Road Transport has 5 rounds of meeting with those Siemens, Scania, everybody came. But we could not bring it below 20 crore rupees per kilometer. It's a no cost for India. It's a no game. It's not possible to do it in India. The second version is Tesla. You are making charging station after each 110 kilometer. If you will see the US coast, then that's the popular one where you are not binding someone to have an extended arm. The third one is to come from India. And this is a mix of majority of ecosystems which you are prototyping together to cover a very densely populated country. The highway which you have picked up is very highly densely populated. It is having all possibility to give you a very good credibility globally if you manage that highway to be converted to a significant amount of vehicle from fossil fuel to clean energy. My takeaway from the presentation is very difficult to interpret it, because what I'm going to speak is most probably you are going to reach into next 7 to 8 months when you will conduct a physical trial on that. But from the R&D's point of view, the work is excellent. The presentation which we have seen is very well placed to start a technical trial maybe in a month's time or 2 months' time. Now we are starting a trial between Chennai to Trichy for trucks. So definitely once we complete that, we will look forward to see the possibility if we can start Delhi-Jaipur on trucks. Electric trucks and hydrogen trucks are two comparison which is hurting the transition. That's my one takeaway. The transition is not available. ICCT is one organization. There are a couple of organizations who are represented by esteemed speakers who are always putting this clarification in the public domain that you don't need to wait for hydrogen trucks. It is going to take some time. In that waiting, a lot of people are not taking, a lot of large companies are not taking decision to switch to a clean mobility. So that's one cent which I want to place on the table, that we need to speak more about it on a very technical parameters that how they both can be compared. There is no credible data available to do rather than couple of researches. Second is electric truck can be a game changer only if you can manage the downtime. Whether you are going to charge it, whether you are going to swap the battery, whether you are going to disconnect the trailer from the tractor and you are going to charge the tractor, use the container, plus engage, disengage and then go ahead. So that's going to give a 40-year majority of market share to electric trucks if they manage to do so. Third, electric buses and trucks both need to look on the battery as a subscription. If you are not disassociating the cost of battery from the vehicle, the fleet operator is in a pain position. The companies who are going to run this are going to have a nightmare of doing arrangements for the threefold of the cost of the diesel. So if you separate it, there are still possibilities. Electric mobility stakeholders to sent from the policy side, Ministry of Road Transport and Highway in India in 2022 given you a notification that vehicle and battery can be registered separately. Only trial happened into two-wheeler and three-wheeler. No trial ever happened into SUV, buses and trucks. And two-wheeler, three-wheeler is extremely successful. The swapping model is the result of that. If we are not doing it, we cannot blame going back to government that you are not giving us the space to do the technology test. Second, battery swapping policy is not only talking about the physical swap of battery, it is also talking about the possibility to look at the commercial swap of the battery from the tech. It did not came out so well. I think we all need to join hand together to make that draft becoming a policy tomorrow. Conventional ways of motivating businesses, factories and goods and transport services from a fossil fuel to electric has terribly failed. Why I'm saying it's a very hard statement to make, has terribly failed, is because majority of unorganized sector into buses and trucks, they are still not convinced to buy electric or hydrogen. There are reasons which they continuously putting in the public domain as their problems which go unaddressed. And these reasons are they need to have more confidence on the technology by having a captive route, by having a lease period, by having a technical trial which is sufficing the data appetite of all 6 stakeholders, manufacturer, financer, somebody who is going to use this, somebody who is going to run this and someone who is going to finance it. So all 5 stakeholders who are going to place their bid on it need to have a certain amount of confidence, and this confidence is hurting the transition. So I think all of us are looking forward to PM e-bus Seva, which is now focusing on the unorganized sector as well, in the bus sector. In truck sector, I think you are the right set of people who will be able to make much recommendations to it. So I'm keeping 4 or 5 of my takeaways for the next round. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sinha. I've actually just been told by the organizers that we will have to end at 12 as scheduled. I had hoped we could push 10-15 minutes later, but we are going to be rigorous with time. What I'm going to do now is open it up to the audience briefly for any questions that you might have for Prajakta or Aviral. And then after that, I do want to reserve time for one, I guess, quick fire lightning round with the panel before we close. But if any of you have any questions, yes, sir? There may be, there are mics on the tables, but yes, thank you.
Why is the focus not there on battery management system, etc.? You know, because trucks basically are going to be running on expressway where the minimum speed is 150 kilometers, 100 is extremely fast, you know, and they have to, with batteries, they have to carry massive payload also. And due to voltage issue, thermal issues, discharge, you know, etc., their batteries and their, hardware can definitely degrade very fast, you know. So until or unless we have that kind of software, we can't have that kind of, diagnostics, so that, the driver and the entire ecosystem is able to get that kind of input, that what is the, so that they were able to have the maximum efficiency. Because we have that battery management system in the two-wheelers, cars, etc., but that is missing in the, trucks, etc., and because it's so much of a heavy capital intensive thing, until or unless we invest in that, because according to studies, China has done it, massively invested in them, and they are able to get 20 or 30% efficiency because of the software, because the driver takes the shortest route, and because he is able to, manage the fleet much more, extremely well, so until or unless we invest in that, we won't be able to get that kind of efficiency. 20-30% is quite big. Thanks.
Thank you. I take that more as a suggestion and a remark, and we actually do want, in the next phase of the study, we hope to have a chance to look at the potential for battery swapping in this exact context. So all the factors that you raised are absolutely true. We recognize that. We are hoping to investigate that further. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Hi, this is Charit from Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis. My question is to the presenters and perhaps anybody on the panel. There's a basic difference between electric truck charging and the smaller vehicle charging. One is the load and the other one is the space for charging. Like, have we studied anything on the parking space requirement on the highways for charging electric trucks? And if this is the level of so many thousands of chargers we need, have we paid any thought to where do we have these charging hubs that needs to be set up, and who is going to set up those charging hubs, and how is the land allocation being planned for that? Thank you.
I'm not sure who that question is precisely directed to. I'm not in a position to answer, but I'll see if Project.
I'll take it.
Oh, sure. Yes, sir.
Look, we ran a 40 feet truck, 54 feet long truck. It was 40 feet, carrying a 40 feet container. So most of the places across highway, we had the problem to park that truck. Because, when we started electric mobility in India, we thought that these are going to be three-wheelers and four-wheelers or cars. But now we have come out from that drain. Now electric mobility is buses also and trucks also. So the entire thing has to be re-looked at. Across highway, I don't think land is an issue. But once you have it, there are ample spaces where you can move in, and if a 40-feet truck can go, then smaller trucks can very well then fit in, and then you have to make such arrangements so that it can go charge and go away. So a prescription can be done, and then trucks can vary in terms of, we generally are running 32 feet long customized truck size in India. We hardly have 40 feet. We run 20 feet long container, and mostly the bigger trucks are 32 feet. That is customized, that is not a standard. And then we have 40 feet container. So yes, a recommendation is needed to have ample space where we can go and charge the trucks.
Well, good morning everyone. My name is Chetan and I represent a company called Electra Green Tech. I have a couple of points and I'm not sure whether these are questions or suggestions, so I leave it to the judgment of the speakers here. While preparing this particular report, which did provide very good insights, were the researchers able to get the viewpoint of the CPOs? Because I understand unless this whole charging business is profitable for the CPO, we cannot really hope to have this, move up to the next level or as much as we would like. From example, I might be wrong here, and I believe Mr. Drew might correct me here. An average period for achieving break-even for a CPO in a country like US is about 7-8 years. And here, our Ministry of Power comes up with guidelines that prescribe a concession period of 10 years for a land which, the CPO will be getting from the government. Will this be a profitable venture for the CPO? Because unless this is exciting enough for CPO to venture in, I don't think we can really look forward to the kind of growth that we are expecting. Second, India might be the 7th largest, country in the world, but land by no means is cheap here. It is very good to say, and it is very good to discuss that we need more than 100 chargers between Khidki-Dola and Dharuheda. But if you go on acquiring land on that stretch of the highway, believe me, no project will be viable for you to undertake. So are we looking at a scenario where probably more number of stations with less number of chargers is more feasible than less number of stations with more number of chargers? So I do hope that in future reports, such a scenario is compared and presented. Third would be for the greenfield highways. Why can't we, let MoTH acquire special parcels of land, especially for charging of trucks and buses? Now I understand that they are doing it as wayside amenities scheme for the operators, but these are largely making sense for the operator if, he's looking at the passenger EV segment. Trucks, buses, they require more space to park, and in any case, the profitability of the wayside amenities operator lies with the fact that how good he is able to make use of the utilities, the restaurants or the game zones, parlors he has, set up. If a truck is getting charged at your station, no passenger vehicle probably would like to stop there and eat at the same eatery where, truck driver is having his meal. That's the sad reality of the country. So why can't we ensue more with this task that, for at least the greenfield highways, please acquire special parcels of land, especially for setting up chargers for buses and trucks. Thank you. That would be all.
Thank you. I'm going to take just one more question in the interest of time. Yes.
Hello. I am a mobility student, and my question was to Abhijeet Sinha sir. When you announced about TTR 3, I did a research about TTR 1 and TTR 2. According to the reports, you did a technical trial of buses first. So given the stats of India, the buses are less in India compared to trucks, and you are introducing trucks in technical trial run 3. So why is your chronology going in a backward order rather than first giving a trial of trucks and then buses?
Thank you. Actually, sir, what I'm going to do, because I am going to ask all of you for one more round of remarks, if you could remember that question and kindly integrate it into your response as well, then I think we'll be efficient with time. Thank you. I think we've heard a lot of really, really helpful suggestions, important points. Any one study, of course, cannot, be comprehensive and cover every single angle or possibility, but hopefully we will have another phase of this study moving forward, and all the suggestions that you mentioned have been noted. Very briefly, Prajakta or Aviral, from anything that you've heard, do you have any kind of quick remarks at all, or?
Suggestions that both of these gentlemen provided, and we have the same questions. We have the same questions, and we'll be exploring that in our next iterations. So thank you for the suggestions, and we'll be reaching out. Thank you.
So, just to answer on one question for the parking sites that you asked. So that was part of the study, and we did actually consider the, so from 7 tons to 25 tons and above is what the trucks categories we were looking at. So the detailed site validations that we did across the corridor, and we mapped certain sites where this actually can come up. We did trials on understanding on how much area would be required for these parking to happen, considering all of these category vehicles, some part of it could be planned, could be parked at those locations. So that is part of the detailed study, and the full report talks about them also.
Thank you. I wish we had 2 hours with this distinguished panel, but it looks like we now have 15 minutes and 5 panelists. So this will turn into a rapid fire round, but I do hope that some of the panelists are able to stay afterwards for tea, coffee, and those of you who would like to interact with them have further opportunities to do so. I am going to ask actually the same question to all of you, and we'll do what we did the first time, is just maybe start with Professor Zakir and with Mr. Sinha. Um, Each of you have done extensive amounts of work on freight electrification, in some cases thinking about what that means for the electric grid. India obviously has huge targets for freight needs and priorities for freight electrification. If you were, and this is because of the time we have left, if you were an elevator and had to make an elevator pitch to senior Indian government decision makers who have some influence over policies, either in the transportation sector or in the power sector, to accelerate the kind of reforms that are needed to support freight electrification. Based on your extensive work, your decades of insights into this, if there were just one or two things that you wanted them to prioritize in the next 5 years in terms of policy or regulatory reforms, one or two things that would really unlock freight electrification for trucks in India, what would those one or two most impactful things be from your experience?
Thank you. Very, I would say, challenging question and also time limit that you have put. So I think, I'm not sure if we should restrict it to the charging infrastructure only because there are outside charging infrastructures. For example, I would say one of the major hurdles in adoption of e-trucks would be the cost, bringing down the cost of the trucks, because at the moment they're very, very costlier than the diesel or conventional fuel-based these trucks. So therefore, that bringing down the cost is one of the major hurdles that need to be looked at through various policy interventions and incentive mechanism that would be required. And one related aspect I would mention is this: the battery cost is one of the significant component of the cost of any vehicle, electric vehicle, and in trucks it is actually relatively higher. So therefore, I think there is a scope of actually looking at which type of electric trucks, when it comes to battery, should be adopted in India. I think, in my opinion, one of the key factor that would reduce the cost is adopting either battery swapping or these flash charging, opportunity charging that would be available, which could reduce the battery cost of the electric vehicle, these trucks, and accordingly reduce the overall capital cost of these electric trucks. That's on the broader perspective, in my opinion. But on the grid side, the charging infrastructure side and the grid integration side, what I would like to mention is, in my opinion, is I don't think we have an option to simply go for what Drew was mentioning, megawatt charger level chargers, single chargers. I don't think that probably is going to work in the Indian context. What, in my opinion, we should, while working towards the high power chargers, we should look at how we can best utilize the existing charging infrastructure. For example, we are working on one of the transportation departments in one of the states for these electric bus depots. We know that these electric bus depots, vast majority of the daytime, they remain unutilized. So wherever it is feasible, why can't we open up this charging infrastructure for electric trucks? Because it's already there and the utilization is very low. If you look at the utilization factor, is quite low. So therefore, existing charging infrastructure, opening up those existing charging infrastructure that is there, how we can actually make best use of that to cater to these electric buses. And second is that what was a very relevant question is that putting up this megawatt scale charging stations on the highways is going to be challenging from the CPO's perspective, because there has to be a utilization. We know that even for two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler segments, this has been that chicken and egg problem already, that how much charging infrastructure I need to have a seamless adoption of the electric vehicle. Is exactly same thing is going to be here, the scenario. There has to be minimum utilization of those megawatt scale charging stations. If that's not there, it would not make a business case for them. So therefore, that's what I'm trying to point out, is we should have multiple use of the charging infrastructure. The same charging station should be available for ideally almost all the vehicle segment, starting from two-wheeler, three-wheeler to electric trucks, so that it has better utilization, charging utilization factor, and according to the business case. I would stop with that. Thanks.
I think the first, I'll make maybe 2 points. First of all, I think you beautifully described your next research study. You know, and I would say that from my side, if you ask me, Drew, what do we need to do to transition from fossil to electric vehicles in India, I will tell you the policy prescription. This is what we need, these are the forms, this is how to do it, this is the research, etc. When I ask that question to the power sector, nobody knows. Really. I have not heard an answer. And that's why the industry is so terrified. And I also am terrified. Because if we don't even know what policies we need, what are we going to do? So I thought you framed it beautifully, but I think we need to answer that question. And I don't think we have that answer here. Point number one. Point number two, I can at least say that a starting point would be to develop, as Averell nicely said in one of his slides, a national freight zero-emission charging infrastructure strategy that builds off of where trucks are currently used. As the professor has nicely said multiple times, let's not forget the existing infrastructure that we currently have. Let's build off of that. Absolutely. Let's be pragmatic. Let's be all of that. Right. That allows us then. Let's start with a transition from shorter range electric vehicles and slowly building out to the long range tractor trailers. Right. We can't go from 0 to 60. Right? That's a starting point, and then within each of those corridors, you can then figure out what your strategy is. My hope would be that maybe the situation in Delhi, which is not, you have a time disconnect between where you would like the trucks to be sitting and when they actually are sitting, right? Maybe that's different in other cities. Maybe you can figure out, nice to have that data, right? So I would start there, but then there needs to be some type of overarching strategy that gets us to accelerate the investments in the grid. Maybe that's just a big national bond that funds it. Maybe it's a combination of a public-private partnership that funds it. But we need a big, bold idea here, even if it seems scary and unattainable at this point, because right now we don't have sufficient, and it's not just India. I don't feel like we have it in the United States either, and I don't even hear. So there's my sober assessment. Thanks.
So coming to what policy can do to accelerate ZET adoption, also creating, the required charging infra. I think I have a long list, but I would keep it short. One is that the TO2 tariff as an effective tool has already been suggested in the presentation that was made today. So that, I think, is the first very small step, I would say, but very effective, that the government should ensure at a pan-India level. To make full benefit of that, government should also set up some guidelines on, how the highway charging infrastructure for electric trucks can follow a flexible model to be off-grid and on-grid. Also bringing in the batteries storage in the equation, utilizing the non-peak tariff for power to store energy and utilize it to rationalize their charges to the end users. One proposal that we have already worked upon and we have shared with a few states is that charging infrastructure should be an integral part of all the logistics infrastructure coming up on all the greenfield and brownfield highways. Should be a base hygiene level intervention by policy, all implemented in PPP mode, where government comes forward with the real estate and the grid connection kind of a support, and the rest is taken care by the private parties, which will also make the business case better for the CPOs as expected. So a PPP model, of course, through open bidding process and all. Other thing that I would expect is to be largely covered in the upcoming, maybe the FAME policy next version that would come up, is to incentivize the setting up of charging infrastructure within the plant and warehouses by private sector entities. Some special campaign to be run to ensure that charging infrastructure subsidy or the incentive part is utilized well by the private sector to set up captive charging stations. And this is something which can very well be complemented by the states as well, which any which way extend a lot of incentives to the companies for bringing investments as a part of their investment promotion policies. So the states and the center both can give some kind of a push to or nudge to the private sector to invest in charging infrastructure within their plants, warehouses, so on and so forth. And similar to highways, government should also come with a mandate for, like say, GENCOs and the ports and so on and so forth to have integrated charging infrastructure in the premises to ensure the adoption of electric trucks and the closed loop movement, which I said is an immediate opportunity for us to look forward to. Thank you.
In terms of policy influence, what Drew said, we should have a national freight infrastructure policy. Once you have a concrete policy in mind that how you're going to build it up, then things will fall in line. This includes both. Land is one of the most critical part of it, what is scarce, and it's very difficult to acquire land across highways. When it is NHAI, when it is BPCL, they acquire lands, they run their roads, they run their pipelines, it happens within time. So I expect that from center, if there is a concrete charging infrastructure policy, I also foresee lots of public and private partnership, because charge point operators are ready to do the business, but there is no land, and electricity is another problem. So looking at both the angles, if I'm there to do the business, if I have land and that too in terms of PPP model, wherein the another problem with charge point operators are the ROI also. Suppose I am going to, we are talking about multi-megawatt charging infrastructure, so that will cost you crores and crores. I just inquired out of curiosity that if I have to establish a megawatt scale charging station at Delhi, at across highway, then how much this is going to cost? Because most of the states in India is having 50 kilowatt limit till LT charging. So if you want more, then you have to go for another possibilities, that is HT. Once you get into HT, so 1 megawatt HT connection in Delhi would cost you 1 crore. Then you have to do the land acquisition, that's the cost. Then you have the charging infrastructure cost. And then at the end, the occupancy of a typical charging station in Delhi is only 4 or 5%. So in my lifetime, if I am a charge point operator and I have not been given such arrangements, or there is no such concrete model where I can recover my money, in my lifetime I won't be able to recover my money what I'm going to put across the highways. So that the entire business sense dies there. So I see that government has a bigger role to play, and a well-planned infrastructure has to be developed, an ecosystem rather than only a charging station. And what Dr. Zakir said, that we will have to open up for the trucks also, for the buses also. It's like we have to ensure that the infrastructure is utilized at the maximum occupancy is more than 50% or 60%, so that I as a charge point operator recover the cost, and then the business happens. Another problem at the bottom line is the cost of the vehicle. if I mean, the freight is same. If I have to run my truck from Delhi to Ludhiana or Delhi to Jaipur, I'm going to get that 40,000 bucks only. But my truck is costing 1.25 crore. So in my lifetime, where I'm going to recover this money? So battery can come in a service model, not necessarily in swapping. Battery provider can come as a third party who will join the business, and then battery subsidies can be directly given to the battery service providers so that their interest is also served. And actually you are defragmenting the entire thing, that I have a vehicle, subsidy can be thought of given to them, then there is a battery cost that can be subsidized. So now you become at par with the IC engine trucks. There I think a business sense.
Thank you very much. I really feel like we need part 2 of this discussion. We don't have that luxury today. I do want to allow Mr. Sinha some concluding remarks based on the question I've asked. I know the lady in the front had also raised a question.
I don't have time for giving my rest of the wish list. Definitely we keep on speaking on forums, you can collect from there. But at least questions I can take. I'm also president of Charge Point Operator Society of India. I'm yet to figure out it's fortunate for me or unfortunate for me. So coming to your question, I think everybody of us has zeroed down to a certain level of inability to answer it. And right now it is to an extent true, it's not possible. But anything which came in this conversation, number one, it came land, kaise milega, kahan milega, kitna milega, kaise milta hai. Second, the large charging station concept or the dhaba charger one. Third, profitability of that charging station, possible for us or not. And last but not least, how to fund it and also have it green powered. All of this came to us in the previous trial. All these questions which you have asked or people have asked has been answered by National Highway and EV. Please go back, read about it. I will just point out a couple of them. When we started and we told people each station is going to cost 25 crore rupees. It was not at all clear. Nobody was convinced why it is 25 crore rupees. It's because every station is having 4 billboards, a conference hall, a 2-wheeler, 3-wheeler showroom, a food court, majority of things which are making money for them. And the concept later when it reached to an usual fruition that no one is happy with what you are doing from last 8 years. One charger which you are inaugurating on a highway, if 20 people are turned around by that charger that it is not working, their software or the connection is not correct, they would not like to go back to that one, what we call it dhaba charger. It will not survive once you have a large infrastructure. Now go back to the large infrastructure required a land. Land in 2018, first guideline of Power Ministry was not mentioned. However, the corridors were mentioned by the Power Ministry. In the second guideline and the third guideline, you will see NHAI participating in the guideline, giving you a clarity how I will give you land. Now they have 2 options. One is wayside amenities, old model, you can just put 1 or 2 charger. Second is to come to our panelists also have agreed to an extent is PPP model. NHAI has not ever opened a hybrid model for giving a land to both public and private in one bid. They have always opened either for people, either for PSU. First time we have managed to convince them, and that is why NUT hybrid e-mobility is very important as a financial model. It gives opportunity for all stakeholders to bid together on the land so that it can be given to at the same time to Adani, Ambani, Reliance also, and at the same time it can be given to Power Petroleum PSUs also. These pieces are more than 2 acres. This is profitable. Every asset which is being commissioned on that is having 36-month break-even period. If not within 36 months, you are not going to get commission, whether it's a LED board or a 2-wheeler showroom. The current scenario of our nation, I would not have answered this question if this would not have gone to Parliament. But I'm happy it is already in the 17th session of Lok Sabha on the floor for question that our break-even period of charger in India is 45 years. The one which we have purchased from the payment on the cost of taxpayers' money. The fame which we have placed, the girl who asked a very good question is why buses are very less, trucks are very high, so why you did the bus trial first, why not the truck trial? I have two answers for this. I did not got trucks when I was doing trial into 2021. There was nobody was ready to provide truck. Today nobody is providing me hydrogen truck. I want to do a trial comparative between hydrogen, electric and diesel all together, but there is no hydrogen truck. And the second answer to you is lot of things going into wrong directions. We would have done the low emission zone first, we would have done the captive route first, but we went to cities and we started retailing electric vehicle. There are reasons, there are conspiracies, there are misinterpretations through the oil lobby to auto lobby and then to the steps on electric mobility that I don't want to discuss here, but it has happened. And if we want to make it profitable, we will have to have a PPP model. In a very gestation period, every charger which you are having, you will have to marry to a vehicle. And child marriage is not going to help you. You will have to make them married at the infant stage. When they are commissioning, there has to be a captive user of 30%. So now bringing you back on the numbers very, very specifically to the answer to the questions which you have paid. Every station on NHEV is costing 25 crore plus. Every station is divided into 4 major power units, which is having 80 kilowatt, 80 to an extent is 3 megawatt, 321, 3,200 something, and 84. This 80, one of them which is serving the restaurant area is only taken from the power grid. Rest all 3 of them, one is on the solar, another is on the highway, you have seen vertical turbine on the divider, that is being prototyped now, and the third is on the generation of hydrogen. Whichever way it is possible, it is yet to be answered by the R&D. So out of 3 megawatt, only 1 megawatt is on the grid, on the fossil fuel grid. Second is entire utilization of each charging station, not only commercially, but also technically, financially, is reaching to its break even and doing commissioning from day one 30% minimum guarantee charge. So now a PSU, a public unit, all of them, they can look at it as a next petrol pump. That was the reason why NHEV started this pilot, to make it technically and commercially competing to petrol pump, and finally we have managed to do some work which is making them possible. Now why this 800 crore rupees was given to Power Petroleum PSU, why this land piece at NHI has to give has not reached to a certain level, these all answers I think in coming time will come. Definitely it is at the parliament level, so we'll be able to bring some answer. One last thing which I wanted to add, it is very important to add, because electric buses and the diesel buses operations, when you are going to funding entire infrastructure, please, this is a prescription request, whatever you want to take, both 3 of you will take this forward. Please keep calculating your per kilometer cost. Do not calculate into some other nomination or units, because 2 things which I see coming is the electric tariff of tolling in coming time. So National Highway or the concessionaire or the toll operator might be coming with a certain amount of toll increment into that highway if that highway is an e-highway. What money you require, you can divide per kilometer. This will help us to decide the tariff per kilometer tolling. The second thing is net zero renewable energy integration, which my friend would more advocate more than me, is something which you should not delay back. Do not commission a charging station which is not having a renewable integration. After 4 or 5, maybe in a 6-year time, you will have to come back on the drawing board. So do it from now. If it is not becoming profitable, there are other ways to do it. And I'm more than happy to do any technical trials. In post till December I'm occupied, but post December I can take it up from Delhi, Jaipur, Agra, and wherever you want to. Thank you.
Our hands are tied. There is another session that needs to start here, but I know that everyone has already, in the short time we've had with the panelists, we've learned so much, and it's very clear that the work that you all do, Professor Zakir at your research center at IIT, Drew, ICCT, Mr. Jaiswal at Smart Freight Center, Mr. Singh, the India Smart Grid Forum, and of course Mr. Sinha, NHEV, and all of the work that you all do, your institutions do, generate valuable evidence to advance freight electrification, and as you've shown us today on the panel, really point towards important policy reform that is urgent and well supported. So thank you for sharing all of that with us. Just thank you on behalf of ICCT and RAP. And yes, we look forward to future studies. You've given us some really good ideas about where to take our studies next. So we look forward to continuing this discussion at some point in the future. Thank you.